The alarm systems screamed through the Galactic Council chambers at exactly 0300 hours, Galactic Standard Time. And Ambassador Vexthara of the Zynthian Collective jolted awake in her quarters, with all 6 of her sensory stalks standing rigid with alarm. She pressed her communication pad, and the face of her aide appeared, trembling with what she recognized as fear. "Ambassador, all human channels have gone silent," the aide said, his voice cracking on the last word. Vexthara felt her primary heart skip in rhythm, because the humans were many things: loud, chaotic, endlessly talkative, but never silent. "All of them?" she asked, already knowing the answer would change everything. "Every single one across 347 colonies, 89 space stations, 1,200 deep space vessels, and their homeworld Earth," the aide confirmed. Within the hour, the council chambers filled with representatives from every major species in the known galaxy, and Councillor Thrain of the Crothen Empire stood at his podium with his scales reflecting the harsh emergency lighting. "This is clearly an attack," Thrain announced, his voice booming through the chamber. "My intelligence suggests a coordinated strike, possibly by insurgent groups." "Your intelligence is worthless," snapped Dr. Melara, the Viridian xenoanthropologist, her wings fluttering in agitation. "The humans vanished in a 3-minute window, across distances that span 40,000 light-years simultaneously, and no weapon we know can do that." The chamber erupted in arguments and accusations, while Vexthara pulled up the data streams on her personal display, and the numbers made no sense at all. At 22:47 hours the previous night, every human signature had simply stopped. Not died, not been destroyed, just stopped existing in normal space. "Send scout ships immediately," she commanded, overriding the chaos with her authority as council chair. "I want eyes on Earth, Mars Colony, New Nairobi Station, and at least 20 other major human settlements within the next 6 hours." The scouts launched within 30 minutes, their faster-than-light drives pushing them to maximum speed, while the council members waited in tense silence that felt so wrong, because usually the human delegates would be cracking jokes or offering coffee to everyone. When the first footage came back from Earth, the entire council chamber went silent in a way that felt heavy and suffocating. The scout ship's cameras showed New York City in perfect condition, with vehicles stopped in the middle of streets, and doors hanging open on buildings, and steam still rising from street vendors' carts, but not a single human anywhere. London showed the same scene: half-drunk cups of tea sitting on tables in cafes, and newspapers scattered on park benches, and pigeons walking fearlessly down empty sidewalks. Tokyo, Mumbai, Lagos, Sao Paulo, every city told the same impossible story of life interrupted mid-moment, with no signs of struggle, or violence, or even panic. "Check the orbital stations," Vexthara ordered, her voice barely above a whisper. The footage from the human space stations made everything worse, because there were meals floating in zero gravity, where they had been released mid-bite, and computer screens still glowing with half-written messages, and children's toys drifting through corridors in schools. One scout ship found a human cargo vessel called the Dancing Marianne, stopped dead in space, between the Proxima and Alpha Centauri systems, and when they boarded it, they found the pilot's seat still warm, and a coffee mug labeled "Galaxy's Okayest Pilot" floating near the controls. Dr. Melara studied the data for hours, while the council argued about next steps and military responses, and finally she stood up with her wings spread wide for attention. "Stop," she commanded, and something in her voice made everyone listen. "This was not an attack, and we need to understand what we are actually seeing here." She projected a timeline across the main display, showing every human signal disappearance mapped against galactic coordinates. "The vanishing happened simultaneously across the entire galaxy," she explained, her voice steady, despite the implications. "Simultaneity across these distances is physically impossible according to every law of physics we understand, which means something else happened, something we have never seen before. Counselor Thrain crossed his massive arms, and his tail lashed in frustration. Impossible or not, the humans are gone, and we need to secure their territories before chaos erupts. Territories? Repeated Ambassador Krell of the Centauri Union, his many eyes blinking in confusion. The humans managed 40% of our interstellar trade routes, and mediated disputes between species who refuse to speak to each other directly. And you are worried about empty planets? That was when reality began to sink in for everyone in the chamber. The humans had not been a major military power, or the most technologically advanced species, or the oldest civilization, but they had somehow made themselves essential in ways no one had really noticed until now. Vexthara pulled up the trade route data and felt her blood run cold when she saw the scope of human involvement. They operated the shipping lanes between Xinthian and Krathan space, because those two species had been at war for centuries and still refused direct contact. They ran the agricultural colonies that nobody else wanted because the work was hard and unglamorous and required patience that most species lacked. They staffed the medical research stations studying diseases that affected other species but not humans themselves. They maintained the communication relays in deep space regions that were too isolated and boring for anyone else to bother with, Vexthara said suddenly. Their computers, their databases, their administrative networks, everything. Dr. Malara nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her large eyes. If they left us, she said quietly, they might have left instructions. The Council authorized immediate access to human systems, and teams of specialists began working around the clock to break into networks that the humans had always freely shared before. 3 days into the crisis, a young Xinthian engineer named Tolvex discovered something in the Human Colonial Administration Network on Mars. There was a message queue with exactly 10,000 pre-written documents titled things like Water Recycler Maintenance Protocol, an Emergency Food Distribution System, and How to Mediate Disputes Between Species That Hate Each Other, a Human Guide. Each document was written in 12 different languages and included step-by-step instructions, simple enough for anyone to follow. They knew, Tolvex whispered to his supervisor. Somehow they knew they would be gone, and they prepared for it. But the most disturbing discovery came from Earth itself, where a survey team found a massive underground facility beneath the Svalbard region that none of the other species had known existed. Inside, they found archive upon archive of human culture and knowledge and history, all preserved and organized and labeled with translations into every major galactic language. There were seeds from every plant humans had ever cultivated, and genetic samples from animals, and recordings of music and art and literature and scientific papers. At the center of the facility, they found a sealed chamber with a holographic projector and a timer counting down. The timer showed 57 days remaining. Ambassador Vexthara stood in that chamber with Dr. Malara beside her. The countdown. What happens in 57 days? Malara asked. I think, Vexthara said slowly, we are about to find out why the humans really left. Above them in orbit, the galactic economy had already begun to shudder and crack as supply chains failed and mediators disappeared and essential services ground to a halt. The humans had vanished in silence, but the noise of their absence was deafening. And somewhere in the dark between stars, in places where normal physics bent and broke, something vast and hungry turned its attention away from the galaxy it had been approaching. Just slightly, just enough, because the prey it had been tracking was no longer there. Week 1, after the vanishing, brought chaos that started small and grew like a wildfire across the galaxy. The first crisis hit the Traders' Coalition on the 3rd day, when Merchant Captain Zexelnoth tried to deliver a shipment of medical supplies for Rigel 7 to the Andromeda colonies, and found himself blocked by ancient territorial disputes. "I cannot enter Crothan space," he transmitted frantically to the Coalition headquarters, and the Crothan refused to let Centauri ships pass through their territory. But the route through Cynthian space adds 3 weeks to the journey, and these supplies are needed now. The Coalition administrator pulled up the shipping records and realized with growing horror that this particular route had been managed by a human logistics coordinator named Maria Chen for the past 15 years. She had somehow maintained friendly relationships with all 3 species, and ran weekly shipments through a carefully negotiated path, technically crossed all 3 territories, but offended none of them. Now she was gone, and the 3 species were refusing to speak to each other directly, and the medical supplies sat in orbit, while people died waiting for them. This same scenario played out on 2,000 different trade routes across the galaxy in the first week alone. The Galactic Stock Exchange crashed on day 4 when everyone realized simultaneously that nobody knew how to process transactions between certain species pairs, because the humans have been handling those exchanges as neutral third parties. Ambassador Vexthara watched the economic indicators plummet on her display screens, and felt a growing sense of dread in all 3 of her stomachs. "How did we not see this?" she asked Dr. Malara during an emergency meeting on the 5th day. Malara's wings drooped with exhaustion because she had been studying human integration patterns for 72 hours straight without sleep. "Them," she replied tiredly. "We just saw them as background, useful, reliable, always there when needed, but never demanding attention or recognition for it." She pulled up a holographic display showing the human presence across galactic civilization. The image looked like a massive web, with humans positioned at every intersection point where different species needed to interact, but could not do so directly. "They made themselves indispensable by being dispensable," Malara continued, her voice filled with something like wonder. "They never held important positions or controlled vital resources in ways that would make other species nervous, and instead they just quietly filled in every gap and solved every small problem until the galaxy could not function without them." On day 7, Councillor Thrain of the Krathan Empire faced a crisis that shattered his pride completely. His military had been planning a major exercise to demonstrate Krathan power and intimidate neighboring species, but when they activated their newest warship fleet, the vessels simply would not respond correctly. The weapon systems failed, the navigation computers showed error messages in human languages, and the life support systems kept shutting down randomly. Thrain's chief engineer stood before him with all his scales turned pale with shame. "My lord, we have discovered that 60% of our military technology was designed, built, or maintained by human contractors," the engineer explained. "We do not have the expertise to service these systems ourselves, because we never bothered to learn, and the humans never told us they were the only ones who truly understood how everything fit together." Across the Empire, Krathan warships sat idle in orbit, while the species that had prided itself on military might faced the humiliating truth that humans had been keeping their war machine running all along. Thrain ordered his forces to stand down, and for the first time in his life, felt something that might have been gratitude toward a species he had always dismissed as weak. But the worst crisis came on day 9, when the Viridian Plague began spreading again. The disease had been contained for 5 years through a treatment protocol developed by Dr. Sarah Chen and her research team on Station Mercy. The treatment required precise timing and specific drug combinations that the Viridian medical community had been implementing successfully. But now, the plague showed new mutations, and the treatment protocols were failing. Dr. Malara received the emergency transmission from her homeworld, and felt her wings turn ice-cold with terror. The human researchers were studying the new mutations, her colleague explained through the video link. They had samples and data and active experiments running, but all of that vanished with them, and we cannot recreate their work fast enough. Within 48 hours, the plague spread to 17 Viridian colonies, and then it jumped species for the first time ever and infected the Centauri population on shared station habitats. The death toll climbed while frantic medical teams tried to piece together human research notes and decipher half-finished experiments. Food riots broke out on day 12 across 47 different worlds. And this crisis caught everyone by surprise, because nobody had realized how much food came from human agricultural operations. The humans had settled worlds that other species considered undesirable, too hot, too cold, wrong atmospheric composition, dangerous local wildlife, and they had terraformed them just enough to grow food. They raised crops and livestock that most species found boring or unglamorous, and they shipped food to hundreds of systems that depended on those imports. Now harvest season was approaching on those agricultural worlds, and there was nobody to bring in the crops. Ambassador Krell of the Centauri Union stood before the Galactic Council on day 14 and made an announcement that nobody wanted to hear. Our projections show that within 3 months, 300 systems will face food shortages, and within 6 months, we will see actual starvation on approximately 80 worlds, he stated flatly. We do not have the infrastructure or the willing labor force to replace human agricultural production. The council chamber filled with desperate voices and accusations and blame. Why did we let one species control so much? Someone shouted. They did not control it, Vexthara snapped back, her patience finally breaking. They volunteered for work that nobody else wanted to do, and we were happy to let them, because it meant we could focus on things we considered more important. On day 16, a survey team exploring an abandoned human outpost on the edge of Xinthian space found something that made everything more frightening. The outpost had been a small research station with maybe 20 personnel, and it sat empty, like all human facilities now. But in the main computer core, they found a message file marked Emergency Broadcast, Do Not Delete. The message was a video recording of the station commander, a middle-aged human woman with tired eyes and a sad smile. If you are watching this, we are already gone, she said simply. We are sorry that we had to leave without warning or explanation, and we are sorry for the disruption this will cause. She paused, and seemed to be choosing her words carefully. We had no choice in this matter, and we did everything we could to prepare you for our absence, though we know it will not be enough. Her eyes grew bright with tears that she did not let fall. Please protect what we built together, she said. Please take care of each other the way we tried to take care of all of you, and please know that we did not want to leave. The recording ended there, and the survey team sent it to the council immediately. Dr. Malara watched it 17 times, and each viewing made her heart ache more. They knew they were leaving, she told Vexthara. They knew it was coming, and they tried to prepare us, but they could not tell us directly for some reason. What could force an entire species to leave everything behind? Vexthara wondered aloud. The answer to that question was waiting in the underground facility on Earth, locked behind a countdown timer that showed 43 days remaining. But before they could wait that long, more discoveries began emerging from human facilities across the galaxy. A human hospital on the Centauri homeworld contained files showing treatment plans for 50,000 patients, all organized and ready for Centauri doctors to continue. A human school on Viridian Prime had left behind complete lesson plans and teaching materials in formats that Viridian educators could easily adopt. A human deep space relay station included a maintenance manual written in such simple terms that anyone could follow it, along with spare parts pre-positioned at every possible failure point. The pattern became clear. Humans had spent years, maybe decades, preparing the galaxy to function without them. They had written instructions for everything, trained local personnel whenever possible, stockpiled supplies, and created backup systems for their backup systems. This was not sudden, Tolvex reported to the council on day 19. The humans planned this exodus carefully and methodically, which means they knew it was coming, and that means they knew why it had to happen. Ambassador Vexthara stared at the countdown timer display from Earth. 40 days until they would learn the truth. 40 days to watch their civilization tear itself apart without the humans there to hold it. Together, she only hoped the galaxy would survive long enough to hear what the humans had left behind to tell them. Month 2 began with a discovery that changed how the galaxy understood what humans had actually been doing all along. Dr. Malara was leading a research team through an abandoned human facility on Rigel 4 when they found a door marked Refugee Services Always Open in 15 different languages. Inside, they discovered a massive complex that could house 10,000 beings, with sleeping quarters adapted for 47 different species' physiologies, and medical bays equipped to handle every known biochemistry. The facility had food stores for 6 months, water purification systems, educational programs for children, and job training centers for adults. Everything was organized with careful labels and instructions, and ready to activate at a moment's notice. How many of these did they have? Malara asked her team. The answer came back 3 days later and made her sit down hard. The humans had built and maintained 847 refugee centers across the galaxy, another 2,300 emergency relief stations, and 6,000 disaster response caches. None of these facilities had been secret, but nobody had paid much attention to them because helping refugees and disaster victims was not considered glamorous or politically important. Now, with the humans gone, those facilities sat empty and unmaintained, while new crises created new refugees who had nowhere to go. Ambassador Vexthara ordered a complete inventory of all human facilities, and the results took 10 days to compile because the scope was so vast. The humans had created an entire parallel infrastructure across the galaxy, dedicated to helping people that nobody else wanted to help. They ran orphanages for children from species whose cultures did not value adoption or foster care. They operated addiction treatment centers for beings suffering from substance dependencies that their own societies preferred to ignore. They maintained hospice facilities for the terminally ill, from species that considered end-of-life care wasteful. They provided mental health services for species who did not believe mental illness was real. They built a safety net for the entire galaxy, Vexthara said quietly during a council briefing, and we never even noticed, because we were too busy with our own affairs. Councillor Thrain stood, and for the first time since Vexthara had known him, he looked ashamed. My people called them soft, he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. We said their compassion was weakness, and their charity was foolishness, but they were doing the work that we were too proud to do ourselves. The Council authorized the formation of a special task force to study and preserve human systems, and Dr. Malara took charge of the effort. Her team began with the human databases, and what they found there was remarkable in its mundane completeness. The humans had documented everything: agreement, every medical treatment, every engineering solution, every diplomatic negotiation, every agricultural technique, every cultural tradition they had encountered. But more than that, they had organized it all in ways that made it accessible to anyone who needed it. A young Viridian engineer named Scaltrix was searching through human technical documents when he noticed something odd. The interface kept adapting to how he was using it, reorganizing information to match his thought patterns, and highlighting sections he might need based on his previous queries. This system is learning from me, he reported to his supervisor. It is designed to teach itself how to teach me. His supervisor tested other human systems and found the same pattern everywhere. Human computers, human tools, human vehicles, everything they built had interfaces that could adapt to whoever was using them. They designed for everyone, the supervisor reported to Dr. Malara. Not just for themselves, but for any species that might need to use their technology. This explained why human tech had spread so widely across the galaxy, despite humans not being the most advanced species. Their stuff just worked for everyone, and nobody had really questioned why until now. The most profound discovery came on day 43, when a team exploring the human colony on Proxima Centauri b found what they called the human protocols. These were contingency plans, thousands of them, covering every imaginable crisis and emergency. There were protocols for planetary evacuation, first contact scenarios, disease outbreaks, natural disasters, economic collapse, war, famine, and things that had never actually happened, but humans had apparently worried about anyway. Each protocol included step-by-step instructions, resource requirements, communication templates, and backup plans for when the backup plans failed. This is excessive. Ambassador Krell observed while reviewing the documents. They prepared for scenarios with probability factors below 0.001%. Why would anyone waste resources on such unlikely events? Dr. Malara looked at him with tired eyes. Because when an unlikely event happens, people die if nobody is prepared, she said. And humans apparently thought it was worth the effort to make sure that did not happen. The protocols proved their value within days of being discovered. A solar flare on Vega 3 threatened to knock out the power grid for the entire colony. But the human protocols included detailed instructions for emergency grid isolation and backup power activation. The vegan colonists followed the instructions and saved their colony. An outbreak of Krellian fever on Station Commerce would have killed hundreds, but human medical protocols showed exactly how to quarantine, treat, and prevent spread. The station medical staff implemented the protocols and stopped the outbreak in 3 days. Over and over, the human protocol saved lives and prevented disasters, and species that had mocked human caution began to understand what it meant to actually care about preparing for the worst. Tolvex made another significant discovery on day 51 while examining human shipyards near Jupiter. He found that human vessels had modular designs with components that could be removed and replaced by any species with basic technical knowledge. More importantly, he found extensive documentation showing how to adapt human ships for use by other species. They were training us to replace them, he reported to the council. Every human facility has training materials. Every human system has adaptation guides. Every human protocol has succession planning built in. The realization settled over the council like a heavy blanket. The humans had been preparing the galaxy for their departure for years, decades. But why? What could force an entire species to plan such a methodical exodus? Ambassador Vexthara stood in the underground archive facility on Earth and watched the countdown timer tick down. 9 days remaining. The archive itself was breathtaking in scope. Room after room filled with preserved knowledge and culture and history. There were seeds from every plant humans had cultivated, stored in perfect stasis. There were genetic samples from animals, carefully cataloged and preserved. There were recordings of music from every human culture, from ancient drums to complex symphonies. There were paintings and sculptures and photographs. There were books, billions of books, in every language humans had ever spoken. There were scientific papers and mathematical proofs and philosophical treatises. There were recipes and jokes and love letters and children's drawings. The humans had saved everything that made them who they were. Left it here for anyone to find. Dr. Malero walked through the archives with tears streaming down her face because it felt like visiting a tomb. They wanted us to remember them, she whispered to Vexthara. No, Vexthara replied, studying the careful organization and clear labeling. They wanted us to learn from them and use what they built. Remembering them was secondary to helping us survive. Even in death or disappearance, or whatever had happened to them, the humans were still trying to take care of everyone else. On day 56, another emergency message surfaced from a human deep space monitoring station. The commander there had left a video message similar to the others, but with one critical addition. We detected something coming, the woman said, her face pale but determined. something that we could not stop and could not survive, but we found a way to protect you from it. The video showed readings and data that meant nothing to the species watching. We are leaving to draw it away from you, she continued, and we are leaving behind everything you need to defend yourselves if we fail. The message ended there, leaving more questions than answers. What had they detected? What was coming? How could an entire species disappear to protect the rest of the galaxy? Vextara looked at the countdown timer. 4 days until the main message would unlock. 4 days until they would learn the truth. In orbit above Earth, the Galactic Council had assembled the largest fleet in history, not to fight, but to witness. Whatever message the humans had left behind, it would change everything. And somewhere in the dark between dimensions, in places where physics bent and broke, the silence that had been hunting humanity for decades finally realized its prey had escaped. It turned toward the galaxy they had left behind, drawn by the life and energy and noise of 1,000 species. But between it and them, invisible defensive grids hummed to life, grids the humans had built in secret, grids designed to protect a galaxy that had never asked for their protection. The humans were gone, but they were still fighting. Protecting. Still human to the very end and beyond. Day 60 arrived with every member of the Galactic Council gathered in the underground archive facility on Earth, and the air felt electric with anticipation and dread. The countdown timer reached 0 at exactly 1200 hours Galactic Standard Time, and the sealed chamber doors opened with a hiss of equalizing pressure. Ambassador Vextara led the procession into the chamber, her 6 sensory stalks rigid with tension. The room was simple and small, containing only a holographic projector on a pedestal in the center. The projector activated automatically, and a life-sized image of a human woman appeared before them. She was middle-aged with brown skin and gray-streaked black hair pulled back in a practical bun, wearing a simple blue uniform with the insignia of the Galactic Council on the shoulder. "Hello," she said, her voice warm, despite the sadness in her eyes. "I am Dr. Sarah Chen, and I serve as human ambassador to the Galactic Council." 15 years. Dr. Malara recognized her immediately. She had worked with Ambassador Chen on the Viridian Plague research. "If you are watching this, then we are gone," Chen continued, "and I imagine you have many questions, so I will try to answer them as clearly as I can." She took a deep breath, and even though it was just a hologram, everyone in the room felt the weight of what she was about to say. 23 years ago, our deep space monitoring network detected an anomaly, she began. Something moving through the space between dimensions, something vast and ancient and hungry. The hologram shifted to show sensor readings and data displays that looked alien even to the advanced species watching. "We called it the Silence, because wherever it went, all signals stopped," Chen explained. "Entire civilizations just vanished without a trace, and we found no survivors, no wreckage, nothing but empty worlds where life had once flourished." The council members shifted uncomfortably as the implications became clear. "We studied it for years and learned some disturbing truths," Chen said, her voice dropping. "The Silence hunts technologically advanced species, specifically those who have achieved faster-than-light communication." She paused to let that sink in. "Every species in this galaxy uses FTL communication," she continued, "which means every species in this galaxy is prey to the Silence." Counselor Thrain growled low in his throat. "But why did you not warn us?" he demanded, even though the hologram could not hear him. As if anticipating the question, Chen's expression grew pained. "We tried to warn you," she said, "but our models showed that panic would destroy galactic civilization faster than the Silence could, and coordinated military action would only draw its attention more quickly." The hologram shifted again to show complex simulations and probability calculations. "The Silence moves slowly," Chen explained. It takes decades or centuries to travel between dimensions, and it targets species one at a time, drawn to specific signatures in their FTL technology. She looked directly at the camera, and her eyes seemed to bore into everyone watching. Humans were the newest species to develop FTL communication, she said quietly, which made us the newest target. But we calculated that the silence would eventually consume every species in the galaxy once it arrived. Dr. Malara felt her wings droop as the full horror became clear. So we looked for solutions, Chen continued, her voice gaining strength. We built weapons, but the silence exists partially outside normal space, and our weapons could not touch it. We tried to hide our signals, but it had already locked onto us. We even considered destroying all FTL technology, but that would have collapsed galactic civilization and doomed. Billions, Chen said. The hologram showed images of human scientists working frantically in laboratories, of massive construction projects in deep space, of desperate calculations and discarded plans. Then, Dr. Marcus Webb from our quantum physics division proposed something radical, Chen said, and a small smile touched her lips. If the silence hunts across dimensions, could we leave all dimensions it could access? The assembled council members leaned forward, hanging on every word. We called it the departure protocol, Chen explained. A one-way quantum displacement that would remove all humans from normal spacetime and relocate us to a pocket dimension beyond the silence's reach. She paused, and her voice grew thick with emotion. But we knew that leaving would not save the galaxy. The silence would simply move on to the next species on its list, and then the next, until everyone was gone. The hologram shifted to show massive structures being built in the outer reaches of human space. So while we prepared our exodus, we also built something else, Chen said. A network of detection grids and defensive platforms designed to confuse the silence and make it lose track of this galaxy entirely. Ambassador Krell stepped closer to the hologram, his many eyes wide. The network mimics the quantum signature of human FTL communication, Chen continued, but it generates that signature from thousands of different locations simultaneously, creating false trails that lead away from populated space. The display showed the silence approaching the galaxy, then stopping, confused by contradictory signals, pulling it in 1,000 directions at once. We calculated a 73% probability that the network would successfully redirect the silence away from this galaxy, Chen said, and we decided that was good enough to try. Her expression grew fierce with determination. The network in secret, she continued. We used every resource we could spare, called in every favor, stretched our economy to the breaking point, and we did it all without telling anyone, because we knew that if other species learned the truth, they would either panic or try to stop us. Vexthara understood now why the humans had made themselves so indispensable. They needed access to every part of the galaxy to build their defensive network. We also spent those 15 years preparing all of you to survive without us, Chen said, and her voice softened with something like affection. We wrote instructions for everything we did. We trained your people whenever possible. We built systems that anyone could use, and we stockpiled supplies and created contingency plans for every crisis we could imagine. She smiled sadly. We knew you would struggle without us, she said, but we believed you would adapt and survive and eventually thrive, because we had faith in you even when you did not have faith in yourselves. Dr. Malara was openly weeping now, her wings trembling. The departure protocol activated 3 days ago, Chen continued, and by the time you see this message, all humans have been displaced to our pocket dimension. We are safe, but we are also gone from your reality forever. The weight of that statement settled over the room like a shroud. We could not take anyone with us, Chen said, her voice breaking slightly. The displacement field only worked for human biology, and trying to adapt it would have taken decades we did not have. She wiped her eyes and composed herself. I know this seems like abandonment, she said, but I promise you it is not. We are still protecting you, still fighting for you, still watching over you from beyond the veil of dimensions. The hologram shifted to show real-time readings from the defensive network. The detection grids are now fully operational. Chen explained, they are automated and self-maintaining, and they will continue to function for at least 500 years, possibly longer. They will keep the silence confused and searching far from your worlds. She looked directly into the camera again. You are not defenseless, she said firmly. We left you complete schematics for the detection technology, and if you work together, you can build your own defenses and expand the network. You can protect yourselves and protect each other. Her expression grew gentle. We were never the strongest species, or the smartest, or the most advanced, she said. But we learned something important during our time in the galaxy. The best way to survive is to make sure everyone else survives too. She smiled, and it was genuine despite the tears on her face. Take care of each other, she said. Protect the weak, help the struggling, prepare for disasters, and never assume that someone else will do the difficult work. Be the shield that no one asked for, just like we tried to be. The hologram began to flicker. We will miss you, Chen said, her voice fading. We will miss the galaxy we helped build, and the friends we made along the way. But we leave knowing that we gave you a chance to survive, and that is enough. She raised her hand in a final wave. Live well, she whispered. Prove that we were right to believe in you. The hologram vanished, leaving the council members standing in silence. For a long moment, nobody moved or spoke. Then Counselor Thrain, the proud warrior who had dismissed humans as weak, fell to his knees and bowed his head in a gesture of respect his species reserved for fallen heroes. They saved us all, he said, his voice rough with emotion, and we never even thanked them. Around him, other council members wept or stood in stunned silence. The humans had sacrificed everything, their homeworld, colonies, their place in the galaxy, to give everyone else a chance at survival. And they had done it without asking for recognition or reward or even gratitude. They had simply done what needed to be done because nobody else would. Ambassador Vexthara looked up at the empty space where the hologram had been. We will not let this sacrifice be in vain, she said quietly. We will honor what they built and protect what they protected, and we will become the galaxy they believed we could be. The other council members nodded in agreement. The humans were gone, but their legacy would endure. And somewhere beyond the veil of dimensions, Sarah Chen and 4 billion other humans watched and waited and hoped that the galaxy would survive what was coming. The galaxy reacted to the truth in ways that humans would have found both heartbreaking and hopeful. Some species immediately denied the whole thing and claimed the message was a hoax or propaganda. Others fell into despair and insisted that nothing they did would matter if something as powerful as the silence was hunting them. But most species fell somewhere in the middle, shocked, grieving, and slowly beginning to understand what they needed to do. Ambassador Vexthara called an emergency session of the Galactic Council 3 days after the message was revealed, and every single member attended for the first time in the Council's 800-year history. We stand at a crossroads, she began, her voice carrying through the packed chamber. We can honor the sacrifice the humans made, or we can waste it. Those are our only options. Counselor Thrain stood, his massive frame somehow seeming diminished. The Crothan Empire proposes the following. He said formally, we will maintain all human facilities within our territory, continue all human treaties and agreements, and commit resources to studying and expanding the defensive network they built. Ambassador Krell rose next. The Centauri Union seconds this proposal, and adds that we should establish a permanent memorial to human sacrifice on every world they once inhabited. One by one, every council member stood and pledged their species' support. It was the first time in recorded history that the Galactic Council reached unanimous agreement on anything. Dr. Malara was appointed to lead the Human Legacy Preservation Committee, and she threw herself into the work with fierce determination. Her first act was to dispatch teams to every human facility in the galaxy, with orders to document, preserve, and continue the work humans had been doing. The refugee centers were reopened and staffed by volunteers from a dozen species. Agricultural colonies were maintained by farming cooperatives that humans had trained over the years. The medical research stations continued their work, with researchers from across the galaxy collaborating in ways that would have made Dr. Chen proud. But the most significant changes happened in how species treated each other. The trade route between Krathan and Xinthian space that had been closed for centuries reopened when both ambassadors met in person for the first time and agreed to honor the path that Maria Chen had maintained. The Viridian government publicly apologized for dismissing human warnings about plague mutations and committed to following human medical protocols exactly. 3 species that had been on the brink of war over a territorial dispute agreed to human-style mediation and actually solved their conflict peacefully. It was not perfect, and it was not easy, but the galaxy was trying. Tolvex led the effort to study and expand the defensive network, and what his team discovered filled them with awe. The humans had built the network to be expandable and adaptable, with clear instructions on how other species could add to it. They knew we would need to maintain it, Tolvex reported to the Council, and they designed it so that any species with basic quantum physics knowledge could understand and improve it. Within 6 months, 12 different species had contributed enhancements to the network, and the detection grid was 40% more effective than the original human design. The galaxy was learning to work together in ways it never had before. 1 year after the vanishing, Ambassador Vexthara stood in the Human Archive facility on Earth and addressed a gathering of representatives from every council species. "Today we dedicate this facility as the Archive of Human Legacy," she announced, "a place where anyone can come to learn about the species that saved us." The archive was beautiful. Humans had designed it, but other species had expanded it and added their own contributions. There were exhibits showing human culture and history, interactive displays explaining human technology, and memorial walls listing the names of every human who had lived. But the most visited section was a simple room containing copies of all the human protocols and instructions. People came from across the galaxy to study how humans had solved problems and prepared for crises. The protocols became required reading in schools, and human-style contingency planning became standard practice in governments and corporations. "They taught us to care about preparation," a young Viridian student wrote in an essay that went viral across the galactic network. "They taught us that boring work can be the most important work. And they taught us that protecting others is never a waste of time." The essay ended with a line that became a common saying: "Be the shield no one asked for." 5 years after the vanishing, the galaxy had stabilized and even thrived in unexpected ways. The refugee centers that humans had established were now run by the Refugee Support Coalition, a multi-species organization that had grown to operate facilities on 500 worlds. The agricultural cooperatives had expanded production and developed new techniques that combined human methods with innovations from other species. The medical research community had finally stopped the Viridian plague, using a treatment that built on human work but incorporated Centauri and Xinthian advances. Species that had refused to work together for centuries now collaborated regularly because humans had shown them how. But the most remarkable change was in how the galaxy thought about itself. Before the humans vanished, each species had mostly cared about their own interests and seen other species as competitors or obstacles. Now there was a growing sense of shared responsibility and mutual protection. When a massive solar flare threatened the Rigel colonies, 17 species sent aid ships without being asked. When an asteroid impact devastated a Krathan mining world, traditional enemies sent rescue teams and supplies. When a new disease emerged on the frontier, researchers from across the galaxy immediately began collaborating on treatments. The galaxy was becoming the place humans had believed it could be. Dr. Malara stood in her laboratory 5 years after the vanishing, studying quantum signatures from the defensive network, when her instruments detected something impossible. There was a brief fluctuation in the dimensional barriers, just a microsecond, barely measurable. But in that microsecond, she detected a signal, a quantum echo that matched human FTL communication patterns. She ran the analysis 17 times, then called Tolvex and Ambassador Vextara. It could be random fluctuation, she admitted, showing them the data. Or it could be feedback from the defensive grid, or instrument error. Or it could be them, Vextara said quietly, reaching out from wherever they are. They decided not to announce the detection publicly because it was too uncertain and might give false hope. But Malara kept monitoring, and over the next 6 months, she detected 3 more similar fluctuations. Each one lasted microseconds and could have been coincidence. But each one came at moments when the galaxy faced significant crises. A diplomatic emergency, a natural disaster, a near war between species. And each time, the galaxy successfully handled the crisis using human protocols and human-inspired cooperation. They are still watching, Malara told Vextara during a private meeting. I cannot prove it scientifically, but I know it in my hearts. They are still watching over us. Vextara looked at the data and nodded slowly. Then we should make them proud, she said. 10 years after the vanishing, long-range sensors detected something that made every species hold their breath. The silence was moving again, but it was not approaching the galaxy. It was moving away, following false trails deeper into empty space. The human defensive network was working. Tolvex stood before the Galactic Council and presented his findings with barely contained excitement. The silence is leaving the local galactic cluster, he announced, and our projections show it will be too far to threaten us within another 50 years. The humans saved us, and their sacrifice worked. The council chamber erupted in cheers and tears. They had survived. The galaxy would endure. And somewhere beyond the walls of normal space, in a pocket dimension that human ingenuity had created, Sarah Chen and 4 billion other humans watched through quantum sensors as the galaxy they loved celebrated its survival. They could not return, and they would never be forgotten, but they had accomplished what they set out to do. They had given everyone else a chance. On the 50th anniversary of the vanishing, the Galactic Council established an annual holiday called Unity Day to commemorate human sacrifice and celebrate galactic cooperation. Children across 1,000 worlds learned about the species that had quietly built a civilization worth saving and then left to protect it. The refugee centers still bore human names. The agricultural world still used human techniques. The medical protocols still followed human research. And every ship that launched from every world carried a small plaque with Sarah Chen's final words, "Be the shield no one asked for." In a research station on the edge of the galaxy, Dr. Malara sat at her instruments on Unity Day and detected something that made her heart skip. Another quantum fluctuation, but this one was different, stronger, more coherent, almost like a message. She ran it through every analytical program she had, and the computer finally decoded a pattern. It was an image, a simple constellation of light points, arranged in the shape of a human hand. The hand was raised in greeting, or blessing, or farewell. And then it faded, leaving only starlight behind. Malara sat in the dark and wept. But they were good tears. "We are trying," she whispered to the empty space. "We are becoming what you believed we could be, and we will keep trying until we make you proud." The quantum sensors flickered once more, just for an instant. and Melara could have sworn the pattern looked like a smile. Outside her window, the galaxy spun in all its chaotic glory. 1,000,000 species living and fighting and loving and surviving. They were messy and imperfect, sometimes foolish, but they were also brave and creative and capable of incredible kindness. And they were together in ways they had never been before. The humans had vanished in silence, leaving the council to face the fallout. But that fallout had transformed into something beautiful. A galaxy that finally understood what humans had tried to teach them all along. That survival meant caring for each other. That strength meant protecting the weak. That true power meant being the shield no one asked for. The humans were gone, but they had left behind something far more valuable than buildings or technology or protocols. They had left behind a galaxy that knew how to save itself. And that was the greatest gift anyone could give. Somewhere in the dark between dimensions, Sarah Chen watched the galaxy she loved and smiled. They had done it. They had saved everyone. And in doing so, they had proven that humanity's greatest strength was never their technology, or their endurance, or their adaptability. It was their stubborn, beautiful, absolutely human refusal to let others suffer when they could do something about it. Even if it cost them everything. Especially if it cost them everything. That was what it meant to be human, and the galaxy would never forget.